So welcome everybody to our next session, and in this session we're going to be covering the topic that I think kicked off the event this morning, and which we will be coming back to as well in the final sessions, and that's cyber and cyber security. So this session is called Safety First, Building Cyber Security by Design and Default, and it's that message that Claire gave in her very first session. I think, how do you make sure you build in cybersecurity considerations when you're doing any kind of digital transformation project? We have got brilliant speakers here again for this panel. Please do take this opportunity to put your questions to them. There is, I know I say this in a lot of the sessions, but when it comes to cyber, there is no silly question on cyber. So please, don't want you to leave today thinking, I wish I'd asked that question about cyber, whether it's kind of cyber on a big national level or yourself. Do you have a personal kind of question about what should you be doing in the workplace as well on cyber? So all questions very welcome. I'm going to introduce our panel. I'm going to give them a couple of questions myself, and then I'll hand it over to all of you. So first we've got Chris DeRusha, who is the Federal Chief Information Security Officer at the Office of Management Budget here in America. Then we've got Anne Dunkin, who is the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Energy, also from here. Great to have you again on one of our panels, Anne. Then we've got Tim Newton, who is the Industry Advisor Manager for Microsoft. Hi, Tim. We've got Martin Bowyer, who is the Deputy Director for Securing Government Services at the Central Digital and Data Office in the UK. Last time Martin was on a panel, he kind of broke into musical theatre, so I'm expecting great things from Martin today. And then we have Darren Hatton, who is the Chief Digital Officer for Hippo. So thanks to all of you for being here. I think I'm going to start with a very general question, I think, just to set the scene. And that's, could you give us, from your perspective and where you sit, your sense of the current cyber threat, the kind of the landscape of that threat? How has this changed over recent years? And in your opinion, how well do you think the public sector is kind of responding to that challenge? So I guess it's, where are we? Kind of how are we doing on this? Chris, I'll come to you.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for the question. Everything is a lot faster than it used to be, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about when we say AI. Obviously, we're all learning about the pros and cons of generative AI, but AI, machine learning, has been integrated into tooling for good and bad purposes for quite some time now. And the attack cycle is fast. There was a time early on when people were practicing here in the 90s, where maybe you could count on some time for the CVSS score to get marked, and a few weeks for people to develop exploits and sort of start to see these things out in the wild and then share that information of worry about this one. Day, less, way less sometimes. When we did the Log4j review, I sit on the Cyber Safety Review Board that we created a few years back. And, we studied this with data. We brought in a number of companies that had a lot of data on how fast, that was one of the questions we had, did people start exploiting that vulnerability? And it was very fast. It was very fast. And so I think that, that means a lot, right? Because that means how you react to that has to change. You have to do risk-based prioritization. You see DHS responding to things like that by doing the known exploitive vulnerabilities catalog, saying we're watching these things get hit now. You need to worry about them now. And then they might issue an emergency directive to just make the point and make sure people don't miss it. So that's one big thing, right? So a million other things. I'll let my colleagues cover the other aspects of what's the threat look like. But I do want to just quickly cover so what's the U.S. government doing about it? At least I could talk about that. I mean, and I came into this position during SolarWinds event, and that was a huge loss of trust in our systems, and we didn't know was there an adversary in here still, and it was a really scary moment, and so we said we have to completely re-architect our approach to cybersecurity. We adopted the zero trust principle model, and we believe deeply in that. And this is all about least privilege and really knowing who's coming into your network and ensuring that you've got that right. And so that has been our goal, is to put out a strategy, which we did, align budget and resources to that, and just kind of lift all of the ships up with some concerted, specific measures to move people forward on all of the different maturity areas that they have to achieve to be able to secure themselves in this fast-moving threat environment. And I think we're making progress. We have anecdotal data on that. We're certainly using it to justify our budget spends and to review our progress. So look, I mean, I think that we're doing a lot here in the U.S. in the public sector side. There's a lot more work to do, there's no question, but that laugh was interestingly timed, but I still believe we're doing a great job.
Sure it wasn't.
But, in all seriousness, like it is hard, but and Ann can talk about what her team does every day. There's a lot of dedicated public servants just like not sleeping and working hard to do this.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Chris. Anne,
Yeah, so that's super. I mean, I got to echo at least the going fast, right? Every new technology that we look at and we say, oh, that's a cool new technology. Well, the bad guys are looking at that too. And they're getting better, faster, stronger. Some of the nation state actors that we used to be able to really easily detect aren't so easy to find anymore. Some of the bad guys are learning how to use all these new tools to attack us. So definitely it's faster, it's tougher, and we have to be great every day, whereas they just have to be good once. And so, but what I also see in terms of what we're doing is a couple things, right? So the flip side of Chris and team say, oh, go do all these things. We're the ones who go do them. And we're doing a lot, and I think we're making tremendous progress. We are incredibly resource constrained, right? This is the challenge of our form of government, right? Is that one part of the government tells you what to do, another part of the government funds you. They don't always align with each other. They don't always see eye to eye about what should be done. And so, we don't really have enough money to do all the things that we're asked to do. So we really have to take a risk-informed posture. We look at, what our highest area of risks are. And so we often get really friendly calls and letters from folks at the White House and other places asking why we haven't done some of those things. But that's not a bad thing. Because I'll tell you, and you've worked at the state level, there's no one telling you what to do. You have to figure it out yourself, and then you have to convince everybody to do it. So this mechanism of me having the White House saying, thou shalt, or having Congress say thou shalt, or an inspector general, or whoever it is not a bad thing. I mean, sometimes we get frustrated, but it's a benefit to have somebody else saying these things are important and they need to get done. And I think sometimes we lose sight of how valuable it is to get help in terms of the importance of what we're doing. So we are making good progress. We still have a ways to go, and we always have to remember that fixing one thing doesn't solve the problem because the next thing will be coming down the road.
Thanks. So both of you are stressing kind of how fast everything's moving, so the public sector have to respond with pace. But some of those challenges, I think similar challenges have been raised in other sessions: lack of resources, lack of consistency, lack of collaboration, kind of having to persuade people to do things in a certain way. But in that context, how useful it can be for the centre to actually say, you're going to do it like this, and having that strategy and framework in place and some of those principles. Thanks very much. Tim, coming over to you.
Thanks. It was 18 months ago, my eldest came home from her senior year at college and said, hey, Dad, check out this ChatGPT thing. And the year after that, we had Copilot at Microsoft. We've got large language models just proliferating in the industry. I'm taking a survey class up at MIT, and some of my classmates are building their own large language models and their own GPTs. I mean, that's how profuse that's getting. That AI is just an accelerant. And cybersecurity, some of the other panels that we had, and that accelerant is really kind of tilted the industry on its head, and it's difficult, I think, in the public sector in particular, to try to keep up. As Ann was just saying, our adversaries, the bad actors, are not risk averse. They are not constrained so much by budgets. They are driving it like they stole it, and the reward is worth the risk that they take. And it's important for us in the public sector side to move fast, maintaining the public trust, but in order to counter that type of threat.
Yeah, thanks. So again, stressing how fast everything has changed, but also, I mean, we'll come back to AI because I think it's going to fundamentally change everything. I think both you and Anne have said for all of the positives for us that AI can bring, there are bad players out there who are going to use this to try and attack us as well. Absolutely. Martin.
It's not all fast. So there is fast. There's fast flash to bang, 0 days, vulnerabilities, and so on. But there's the slow as well, right? It's the slow, insidious adversaries worming their way in through open source software, through supply chain. So we care about the fast and we care about the slow. And quite often, it's the slow that can be more damaging. So there's the fast, there's the slow, there's the democratization of what we used to call nation-state level capability that's now getting into the hands of organized crime groups with the tacit approval of the people who used to own that high-level capability. So there's the democratization, and there's also a spread of things we need to care about. So we talk about attack surface, the amount of digital footprint you've got that can be attacked. You may have seen in the press about things like the Westminster honey trap, where MPs and ministers and others were targeted with traditional honey trap stuff, but actually there's a digital version of that going on as well. So previously, as a government cyber person, perhaps I would have said, I don't really care about protecting this particular minister's personal accounts because that's personal. I need to care about that stuff now. So it comes down to the fact that we are rules and ethics constrained. Our adversaries are absolutely not. So in terms of the development of threat, I think it's a very healthy recognition that that's the case. That's the world we're in now. It's kind of the world we were already in, but at least we can all acknowledge it and move on now. So yeah, fast, slow, democratization, and anything's fair game.
I mean, it sounds overwhelming. I'm going to come back to that because you're saying there's all these things we have to be thinking about. So I think one of my first questions back to all of you is going to be, can we even do this? Like, can we actually kind of rise to this challenge? But I'll park that for now. We'll come to you, Darren.
I think picking on some of the things that Martin was saying there around how, we've got teams working with government departments, agencies that are building software that years ago would probably have been bought, and now government's taking charge and building its own systems and software. We're releasing new code daily, dozens of times a day sometimes. That supply chain element of it, not knowing where, or making sure you know where those open source repositories that you're inevitably leaning on and pulling into your build pipelines, understanding the threats that can bring with it and making sure that you are monitoring and aware of those things, because those are the easier ways for you to get attacked. We spend so much time focusing on things like cloud infrastructure and Microsoft, AWS, GCP and such, but the teams that are building the software, you've got to make sure that you're protecting and supporting them with the right tools and services that can help de-risk the work that they're doing, because they're creating great products for citizens and government to use. But with that comes great responsibility, essentially.
Yeah, thanks. I am going to come back to all of you then, because picking up on all that you said. So is this threat changing so fast? It's moving so fast. There's so many different variables here. Public sector does have a lack of resources. We've said in other sessions we have a lack of skills as well, maybe on the technology side. Can we actually get ahead of the bad players? Is that possible for us to do that? And in that context, are you frustrated by people that work in this sphere, by basic things that aren't being done across the public sector? Are there some repeated things that you think that should be better than it is? Chris, I'm going to come back to you first.
Sure. I mean, we're going to do everything we can, as we must and as we want to really manage this risk. And, we all get in a car every day and we have an indifference curve to that risk. And different societies have answered the question of what's that indifference curve? We've got to get to a point where we can say the same thing for cyber risk in our environments. But are we going to get ahead of the adversary? I'm not sure that can be the goal. I mean, I think that's really hard as the defender and offender in this space. I'm not sure I've ever seen any anecdotal research showing that there's a plan to do that. What we all have been working towards is getting as fast behind that as we possibly can with collective defense and pulling the threads together and achieving as much as we can to ensure that we're fast to respond to the fast new threat and to get better at detecting the slow, persistent threat and ensure that nothing detrimental of harm is occurring to the environment. But that's kind of the goal now is to reduce it down to a manageable level, right? I don't think we're not going to live without risk in the digital age. If that's someone's goal, I'd love to hear their research as to why that they think that they can eliminate the risk. but I think that means things like the insurance market, standards of care in courts, like all of that stuff's really got to get mature while we're chasing talent and defending our networks and moving towards zero trust approach and going after bad actors with criminal penalties to try to disincent their behavior. Yes, 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 and yes. And like some of these fundamental building block things that allow us to live in a normalized state with other risks also must come to bear globally, right? And so I think that's my answer. And I'm very frustrated. I think, if you work in this space, maybe that's part of your personality. You maybe enjoy being frustrated a little bit. That's what brings you into work. I don't know. I'm not describing myself. Yes, I am. But I think that's like kind of good because we need people like us on these walls, like working on these problems. But I don't get frustrated with like the end user. I get frustrated with myself of like, how do I, like it's been a problem for 20 years. How do I get them to use MFA? Like what more should I be doing differently? Not like what should I be saying to them differently? Because that's not working. It's like what do we need to change about making it easier in the technology flow so that it just happens and it's not an option and we just do things securely, secure by design, right? And secure by default.
Yeah, thanks. And you're nodding in agreement there, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, so put on the operational side of that we do every day. No, we're not getting ahead. But if you look at, and again, I don't always want to say things like this because I don't want some hacker to go, hold my beer, let me prove you wrong. But, if you look at our track record, we don't do too badly. We could do better. I mean, we have our moments, and in fact, most of our moments end up being second, third-party risks. That is, the vast majority of the issues I have are where contractors do something they shouldn't have or don't do something they should have. But we do have things that happen within DOE itself as well, and the fact that it's a contractor doesn't matter if it impacts my systems or my data. Kind of doesn't matter who did it. So we keep up. We can always do better. I don't think we're ever going to get ahead because we're never going to have the resources, the time, or the foresight to be ahead of other folks. But I think that the defense in depth point and the collective defense are the keys here, right? So collective defense being we're all going to share information, we're going to share data. I mean, Chris and I were both this morning in a meeting with CISA and CIOs across the government, which is all about how do we share, how do we collaborate, how do we work together, and seeing all those CISOs in a room together. Right, that's the first message. They're in a room together having a conversation about how to defend our broader enterprise. And that's the kind of thing we need to be doing. And we have these information sharing mechanisms within DOE, within other departments, and then more broadly through across the government, through the SMRAs to our critical infrastructure. So all that information sharing from those of us who are able to do the work, right? So we want to take the burden off of the individual. We want to take the burden off of the small business or the school district or the small county government. We want to take that burden. We want to share the information, help solve problems. And so we are making progress in those spaces. And then the defense in depth piece, right? It's that we're never going to be perfect, but if we layer enough defenses, when one of them fails, we've got another defense to back it up. And if you look at the places where we've had incidents, it's multiple layers of failure. It's not we had one thing between us and them and it failed. It was, there was a person who got socially engineered, or there was some data where it shouldn't have been, and then there was a 0 day, and then there was this other thing, and you put them together and you had a loss. And so that's the key, is having those multiple areas of defense. And then, so do I get frustrated when that happens? Yes. When I see 3 or 4 or 5 things that all failed. But our people are human. Things are going to happen. And every one of those is an opportunity to teach someone how to do better next time. And, so we are hopeful that, we will never have a catastrophic event at DOE. We can't guarantee it, so we continue to be vigilant to try and make sure that everybody's on board.
Thanks. I'm touching wood when you say
All
that.
of us are.
Yeah, man, thanks. I'm going to ask Tim and Darren, I'm going to phrase it slightly differently. So do you see things repeatedly in the public sector that you think could be done better? Tim, I'll put that to you first.
Yes.
Do you want to make a list?
Could you give us the list?
Part of it is like the top 2 things, whether you're not updating their software or someone gets phished in an email. I mean, those are the 2 ways that are still the top of the list bad actors to get into our systems. As we talked about already, it would be nice if that, we could get around that, if we could engineer things so that it wasn't so easy for them to do that. I wouldn't say that's frustrating. I mean, that's part of the challenge. Part of it is speed. There's an old metaphor that, every morning the gazelle wakes up and it starts running because if it doesn't run fast enough, the lion will eat it. Every morning the lion gets up and starts running because if it doesn't run fast enough, it will starve to death. So it doesn't matter if you're the lion or the gazelle. When morning comes, you better get up and start running. That's true of us and our adversaries, right? In 2021, Microsoft committed to a $20 billion investment to increase our cybersecurity capabilities. Part of that was, to better serve our customers. One of the other pillars of that was they worked with some of the local community college. They wanted to add 250,000 cybersecurity professionals to the workforce to help that raise that bandwidth on the good guys team. So that was 3 years ago. I don't think we had a good sense for what the market was going to look like in 2024 when we did that. So there's kind of that strategic long-term, here's what we'd like to do 5 years from now, but then there's the constant tactical, what are we learning today? How can we better combat our adversaries every day?
Darren, is that familiar to you as well?
I think I see probably the teams that I work with is slightly different. We're software development teams that we're working with most of the time. I think what I've seen in UK government is that there's a shift in the operating model of those departments. They still have their functions that they do and have to do to serve the public, but they're changing from being organizations that were outsourcing most of their IT to insourcing it and building it themselves. They're becoming software companies. And in doing so, their teams need to change and adapt with it as well, because they're cybersecurity professionals and such. They were used to assuring suppliers. They were used to working with large organizations that were supplying software to them. Now they need to turn their attention to the teams that are developing the software. So the risks change with it. And I think as the organization changes, seeing how organizations become adaptive to that, and that's, people in the organizations as well as the organization itself. So changing skills, learning from other industries, software companies. It's the same thing we see in the automotive industry now. Every car is connected in many ways. And car companies have had to change the way that they look at their, they didn't have to worry about cybersecurity in the same way as they do now. Their products are connected around the world. And I think we see the same thing in UK government. It's a software organization. It's creating, probably millions of lines of code a day. And, with it becomes like a changing threat actor.
So there's a change in perception of how we see ourselves and how we see government. Martin, final thoughts to you, and then I'm going to come over to the audience for your questions.
Frustration is interesting. I must admit, I wasn't expecting to come up here as part of a mutual support group for mathematics. It's a funny old world.
That's why I agreed to come up.
Now you say it, it is actually true. What was I going to say about this? There are some very limited areas where actually we are currently better than some of our adversaries, but they are few and far between. I take heart from the fact that it amuses me. I love putting together and seeing the kill chains that people put together. This is all the different exploits that Anne talked about you string together. And I always love it when I see an adversary has put a really expensive, long-developed thing in a part of a kill chain where I know perfectly well there's a vulnerability they could have exploited for $20. It just tells me that our adversaries also suffer from bureaucracy and all sorts of other interesting things as well. We should never fall into the trap of thinking we're doomed. We do need to stay on top of it all the time. And it's interesting, actually, the more of these sorts of things I do, the more people I see in the room, the more confident I am. Because if you're out there and if you're still awake, congratulations, you're all part of the solution, right? Because by quite a few measures, up here on this stage, you have the two nations that are probably the best at cyber defense. Now, we also know, the people up here also know how vulnerable we are as well. But what's really nice is the number of people who listen to this kind of thing, right? And the more that digital professionals, business professionals listen to this and think about it and understand about it, the better we get at defense in depth, the better we get at things like secure by design. Because I'm not going to do secure by design for all of you. You're going to do secure by design. We'll help you and tell you how to do it. But it's actually down to all of you and everyone out there who's in this space to make it harder for the attackers to get in and make it easier for us to spot when they are. So, you know, this is a team game. It really is.
Thanks, Martin. So again, coming back to that idea that whatever you're working on, you need to be thinking about the cyber implications of whatever you're doing and factoring that in from the start. Okay, over to our audience. Who has a question? Yes, we've got a gentleman down here and then a question over there. So come to you first. Thanks.
I'm Josh Hammond. I'm the media officer for Artificial Intelligence, U.S. National Science Foundation. So from the communications side, you mentioned things like multi-factor authentication. You mentioned things like secure by design. And there are all of these fundamentals. And I was wondering, have you been working with your communications side of the house to try internally and externally to just get these fundamentals locked in so that people adopt?
And could you just repeat who you were, because the mic wasn't working?
I'm sorry, Josh Shamit with the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm the media officer for engineering. Sorry, for artificial intelligence.
I can take a first stab at that. Well, you know, DHS CISA, I think, has done a fantastic job of really understanding your point and thinking strategically about their communications, in particular around secure design, secure by default, because I think they understand that, like, that's a real market-moving opportunity, right? And so, look, I mean, it's same things like memory-safe languages, right? It's like there's these big things that if we can get everybody to understand that it's really not that much harder to do if you just change something on the front end and learn to do it differently and train your people to do it differently and have process controls to do it differently, you can re-architect this and reduce by a vast number the amount of successful attacks. That is, like I said, again, that's the goal, is to get there, and we have to achieve success in these, and I couldn't agree with you more that we're going to have to continue to figure out how to do that communication effectively. And I think in part two, it's like communicating the benefits. And we're constantly talking about, I mean, even the term cybersecurity is probably the wrong starting point, right? It's like, hey, it's like I'm the department of make you get to do things you want faster. You know, like there's better communication, and it's like, and by the way, it's going to be more secure. And you see that in a lot of our rollouts. People move to like SASE solutions and things like that. Like they're getting like so much more throughput on their networks, things are running more efficiently, and they're getting granular access controls on all their cloud environments from people coming in and accessing their resources, the thing they actually care about, right? And not moving through like lumbery old designs and VPN designs. And so, you know, like it's all akin to, I think, to your point, like communicating is a huge part of that, but I don't know.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, this sort of flips on the head the conversation that the three of us had last month, I think it was.
Yeah.
Where, you know, the communication solution that you just alluded to is it can be accelerated by modernizing, right? So if you can convince people, hey, let's use cybersecurity as an accelerator to modernize, and vice versa, right? So if you modernize it, you're going to get better cybersecurity. So let's put our attention and time and effort into getting people to modernize and adopt modern solutions and get all the benefits of modern solutions, and that benefit includes cybersecurity as well. So that's one of the communication methods we use at DOE. But inside DOE, I think people have a good understanding of what is expected of them. The challenge is communicating how we can work together to accomplish those things, because as long as people think that all by myself I have to do this, it's overwhelming. And so to find ways to help them understand that we can work together and we can bring resources from outside of DOE, we can lean on Chris's team, we can lean on CISA, we can lean on Claire's team. All these people we have, our colleagues who can help us solve these problems, that's one of the big communication opportunities for us in that space.
Thanks, Martin. I'm going to come to you because I think this was more a public sector question, so I'll come to you.
It's a great question. So one of the things I ended up doing as part of the government cybersecurity strategy in the UK, which I was a co-author of, was doing secure by design. And quite early on, we had a real Edison moment where the light bulbs all went on when we realized this wasn't actually a technical thing at all. It was a communications program. So when we built the approach, we didn't just write it down. We got a panel together of CISOs across government. We got digital colleagues together. We got suppliers together, including Microsoft, EY, who are out there, industry panel putting it together. And when we started actually rolling it out and implementing it, we thought really carefully about, okay, we'll train the cyber people, of course we will, but actually we need to figure out for all the digital professionals and all of the business professionals, what do they need to know about it? And we started a real consolidated communications campaign hitting all those different groups. So at the point when someone comes up to me and goes, I'm really sick of secure by design, I know I'll have done it. Gina's sitting behind you. She's one of our CIOs. She's had this rammed down our throat several times, right? You're absolutely right. It's a communications exercise. It's not actually a cyber thing at all.
Yeah, thank you. We've got another question back here.
Hi, Cass Olson, user experience researcher and designer with the U.S. Digital Service. In 2020, I had the pleasure and horror of working on a sprint researching unemployment insurance fraud. So one of the things I'd love to ask you on the panel is, how are you centering the impact on the people within the systems? So yeah, we could have vulnerabilities exploited. We could see things as, like, heaven forbid, dollars lost, but how are you centering the people that are harmed if they cannot access their benefits, or people who are falsely flagged for fraud, or people who have their identity stolen and then have all sorts of government benefits screwed up? I'm curious, like, how you're playing with the so what, if at all, for lack of a better word.
So do you mean getting the balance right between making the systems incredibly secure, but by doing that, it might mean that some people can't access, or they get diagnosed with something, and it means that they can't access some of the services that they need?
All of the above, yeah. Tying it back to people.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Darren, any thoughts on this, getting that balance right?
Yeah, so we've had the pleasure of working on a service called the NHS account. So the NHS in the UK is your National Health Service, and the online account provides patients access to their medical record. And in the early days of that program of work, we were talking about the risks and challenges of making a service that would allow users, anyone in the public, to access their healthcare records. We talked about the risk in financial transactions. If your bank account gets hacked, or if you get cheated out of a sum of money, the likelihood is that the bank will work with you to refund that money, hopefully. You can't do that in healthcare. If somebody accesses your healthcare record, there's no way of putting that back in. So whilst we talked to financial institutions about how they secure the systems for their customers, we knew we needed to do something which was quite unique to healthcare. We worked to develop a standard in healthcare which was adapted from UK government's guidance around what's called Good Practice Guide. 44 covers authentication, and 45 so ID verification, very similar to what you have in NIST. A lot of it was spending time with users, understanding how they expected the systems to work, so doing a lot of user research, working with prototypes, building different approaches to that. And we started to see over time how security has actually become an enabler for that system. So we introduced what's called Fast Identity Online, FIDO, into the system, so that rather than using two-factor authentication with things like SMS, users had a better experience because they can use Touch ID, Face ID, and today they can now use passkeys in there because that's another mechanism that's being developed that's just phenomenal from a usability and a security point of view. So you actually end up improving the user experience whilst also improving the security, and it's very rare that you actually find such a good overlap between the two there. But yeah, spending time with users, understanding the challenges that they would have. They have to be able to use the service, but you have to keep it secure. So it's a forever process of doing that research, looking at the feedback that you're getting with the system, and always looking at the new technology. As it talks about passkeys, when things like that come out, look at how you can adopt it as quickly and safely as possible.
Thanks. Tim, is that similar thoughts from you on getting that balance right between secure enough but not so secure that people can no longer use it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a hyperscale cloud provider, I think we have some of the same challenges as the public sector because we're in the business of providing access. If you don't provide access to your constituents, they're not well served. If we don't provide access to our customers, we're not going to survive very long as a company. It would be easier to defend if we could just unplug it and set it aside with some armed guards around it where no one could access it, but it's not super useful there. And so, the other hyperscale cloud providers and Microsoft are working on making that a secure environment, and AI is helping with that. The ability to analyze 65 trillion signals a day, we talked about attack surfaces and the other access points that we have, and find those footprints as soon as they come in. Keep them from moving around the system as soon as they're detected, because they will get in. And that ability to ensure that data doesn't get exfiltrated is super important.
Thanks. We've got 2 minutes left, so I was going to put the question, but I want to make, yeah. So we've got a final question there, and I'll put that very quickly to our speakers.
Hi. I'm Gwen. I work at Gwen Gabeyo. I work at the IRS. I'm a data scientist. And one of the things that I do in my free time is I work with the R core team. And so R is the statistical programming language. It's open source. We submit patches, test them, so on and so forth. And I know that you mentioned open source software and being concerned about it. I think it was Martin that mentioned it. And I just wonder, as what is the way? Is there a way to communicate and to work with government in a way that is, that may, I don't know. I just wondered if you had any advice or feedback about a process or something that we could that people who work in open source software and submit and work on packages patches and build it. Is there a way that we can work together to increase safety, or what advice and feedback do you have? Not only that, but I also know that Linux had a huge issue with the XZ. I'll say, since you're from the UK, the XZ, patch that is apparently a backdoor.
So I'm going to ask. Thank you for the question. We've got 40 seconds left, so I'm just going to get some quick. So, Chris, you were nodding there. Your quick thoughts.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, one thing is, the Office of National Cyber Director have got this initiative called OS3I. So it's really to get after what you're talking about. We've got a huge coalition of people. I don't know who from the IRS has joined, but I mean, that might be one opportunity for you to get your perspective in there, because we're going to use open source. We're going to continue open source. There's a lot of benefits to the way open source risks are managed. That community often, like in that last instance you gave, is like an individual sometimes who just saves the world, and thank goodness. And probably a lot of opportunities for us to develop all software more securely, and so I think that our goal there is to bring all these communities together and to figure out how do we have a more, a better open source, more secure open source ecosystem, right?
Thank you so much. If you want to grab our speakers afterwards on their behalf, I'm letting you do that now. But I'm really sorry, we are now out of time. So lots of issues there, I think, gives me optimism that even though this seems like a very kind of large issue, there's lots going on. And as you say, you've got the two best nations here, I think, in terms of leading the way. So please join me, warm round of applause for our fantastic panel. And just to say, we start again. I think we've now got 5 minutes to all peg it over to the other hall again. So we are all now back in plenary. There's nothing else happening in this hall, but we've got 3 more fantastic sessions over in the other ballroom room. So I will see you over there in 5 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of you. Thank you so much.